consuming more. And part of the consumption is we're using a lot of packaging, we are using a lot of new materials, and we're not thinking of what will happen to it after we use them. So this lack of thought means that we can just keep on making it, and we only think of waste once we see it in front of us. But actually, you can't think of waste separate from the natural cycle. And if you think of waste that it is natural things from the earth coming out and then coming back, then we have to think about it differently. So I think the current is a lack of consciousness that there's something called waste as part of a consumption process. Yes, today we are using a lot of new materials which we're not using 30, 40 years back. A lot of new kinds of plastics, new kinds of chemicals, new kinds of products are coming into place. For example, the fluorescent tube light which we use, that has mercury in it. Or the mosquito repellent we use, that has chemicals in it. Or the paint we use has lead in it. And also the packaging, we're using so many kinds of packaging. We're using many kinds of plastic packaging. And people also using more packaged food. So all this is creating a kind of waste which is very toxic. And we also have no mechanism to deal with it. We are also producing what we call degradable or food waste. Because I think we're wasting more food than we used to earlier. Earlier, I remember we used to eat everything, including the skin was to be used for something else. But today we throw it away. The idea of toxic waste is that the toxicity in it never goes away. So we can deal with the waste, but the toxic elements remains either in the environment and comes back to our bodies, or it impacts other living beings. Take the example of the computer. Now the computer has over 51 types of toxic materials in them. They include cadmium, mercury, chemicals called flame retardants, which cause cancer. Something like mercury can go into your motor functions in the brain because it passes through the brain and the blood barrier, and also passes through the placental, through the fetal barrier. So it goes from the woman to the child, and the child gets a very heavy exposure. If you take lead, because lead is used in our paints, also used in our batteries, then lead exposures will cause mental retardation. That means your IQ goes down, and you never are a full person of what you could be. So these have various kinds of long-term chronic exposures, long-term effects, which include cancer, which includes things like endocrine disruption. That means the hormonal system gets disrupted. If you're a growing child, then you don't grow properly. You have other reproductive failures later in life. Also, you have mutational genetic issues, because now we're finding that some of these chemicals can impact at the gene level itself. And of course, you have very high exposure, then you have what they call acute toxicity. So if you get a very high exposure of mercury, then you can die through methyl mercury. You can, through lead, you can have severe neurological problems as well. So there are both acute and long-term exposures. The acute exposures we've always talked about ever since medicine came into being. But the subclinical, what they call the low-level chronic exposures, that's new science. So last 10, 15 years, we're seeing that there could be no safe level. So earlier we used to say, oh, below this certain exposure, you might be safe. Today we are finding out that no matter what the exposure, it can have long-term impacts. So it's impacting the way the body is developing and how we function as human beings. Also, some tests have been done on what they call body burdens. And we find that each of our bodies is a repository for thousands of chemicals which were not there earlier. So our ancestors who were there 100 years back did not have those chemicals in the bodies. Today we have hundreds of those chemicals. A lot of those chemicals come from waste and from the materials we use. So we've become like a toxic landfill in a sense, the repository of all the chemicals in the world. And the fear is that it not only impacts our lives, but it impacts our children's lives and their children's lives. We all know of this exposure of chemicals which was done in the Vietnam War, when the US Army sprayed herbicide. And the effects of that now are seen in the children of the children. So that means it's gone through the genetic system and impacted it at the gene level itself. So we're talking of some very pernicious and basic issues of human health. The WHO is now saying that almost 25 to 26% of the total disease burden in the world is because of environmental factors. And waste is a very important environmental factor in all of this. Waste is part of our economy because we are a production and consumption economy the way it is currently made. So we produce more when we consume more and the economy goes around. And the waste is an integral part of it, but it's never talked about. This also impacts the natural system very much. For example, when you dispose the waste in a landfill, then some of the toxics can leach into the groundwater, and it will go to the groundwater. And the groundwater, as we know, has very big reservoirs. It's not only below the landfill. It goes across boundaries of the landfill. Or the gases which come from the waste, especially if you burn them, then they can be very, very dangerous gases. Something like dioxin, which is called the most toxic compound made by man. It does not occur in nature. It's only produced through the combustion of, especially the combustion of waste. When you burn PVC plastic in waste, set it to fire, you get very high dioxin production. And dioxin is an endocrine disruptor, is cancer-causing, and can have intergenerational effects as well. Then the other issue which is coming up now is when you burn the waste, you will release carbon in the air. So open burning of waste is a significant cause of emissions of carbon, which causes global warming. So all around, the way we treat the waste, you find that it impacts the soil, the water, the air, and even the larger upper atmosphere. I believe the government is a reflection of our own selves. The government doesn't come from outside. It's what we desire becomes a government. So in that sense, we can't put the problem outside ourselves into something else. So I think ultimately it is first realizing that while we talk of development, because we talk of new consumption and that we need to produce more and consume more, I believe development should be to get equity for everybody, and that nobody should be poor, everybody should get enough to eat and enough in a place to live. But beyond that, when we start consuming for the sake of consumption, then I think it is something which is open-ended and there's no end to it. I think it's that kind of consumption we have to put a stop to. So it starts from the self. Are we just taking nature for granted? And I think it's a basic realization that we cannot act irresponsibly on the planet we are born on. And you can see this at countries which are producing, using a lot of energy, consuming a lot, like the United States, produces so much more greenhouse gases than the poor do. So in a sense, the poor have become really the rich in the sense, because they're the least contributing to the global problems and to the environmental problems. So living as part of the nature we are born in, I think that realization is very important. And within that, then we must be conscious about what we do. I mean, we can do simple things at home. We can do good segregation. But I think we need to also be more active in society, that we need to ask for more. We can't just be passive consumers, because if you're passive consumers, you get the worst. You have to ask that both the government and the industry, that please don't put these toxic compounds in the products I eat. Please don't give me so much packaging. So it's a joint effort, but essentially it starts from community action and community awareness. I think the realization that anything we put out comes back to us. And I often say that if you break a mercury thermometer and throw it out, it will go into somebody will burn it, it will go in the air, from the air it will come to your fish and your milk, and it will be on your plate to eat. So what you throw is what you eat. And I think if we see ourselves back as a cycle of nature and be conscious human beings and be actively conscious human beings, then we can change something.